Okay, so welcome to the seventh An Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm very honored to be speaking to Darren Deojee. Darren is an international teacher, speaker, activist, mentor, coach, father, and home educator of 4 children. He's been teaching from the Toltec heritage of gender tradition for over 10 years and working with native gender for over 20 years. He works with groups, individuals and couples on matters of gender and communication. So welcome, Darren.
Welcome, Piers. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
Oh, a pleasure. So before we go into talking, Darren, I just wanted to explain a little bit to people if this is the first time they've been on this podcast. My idea with these is to get men on and to have conversations really about, these are kind of interesting times and what are the tools, the practices, the teachings that we can use to get through these really. And I was drawn to speaking to you, as I was saying before we started recording. Your name kept coming up from my wife, from I think Thomas Score-Con, and it was like, I'd love to speak to you. So yeah, I really feel honored to speak to you today. So what I'd love from you is what drew you into this work with men?
Yeah, good question. So it was my own journey, really. It's been a lifelong one for me. So I like many others, had absent father issues. So my dad left the family when I was 2. And so I grew up surrounded by women. So I had I grew up with 2 sisters and my mum, so 3 females in the house. And I just grew up with really wounded relationships with the masculine and with men. And I had issues with trust. I had issues with feeling welcomed or safe in environments with men in them. And just through unfamiliarity, unworthiness, various issues that are common in the fractured psyche of children from such environments. But what I really became aware of was in my early teens, I really became consciously aware of my yearning for a role model. And I remember consciously looking around for a role model and looking in the world and consciously realizing that there was nobody that I could see at that time that was emulating what I thought a man could or should be. And I thought I would go out to find out what that was about. And so really my journey actually began then. I didn't really make any headway for many years, but it was consciously set upon then. And I consciously refused to acquiesce to social ideas of male performance or what men should be. But I still also had very, very wounded relationships with men and the masculine at the time. And then what drew me into the men's work was that I got into a lot of spiritual traditions and energy traditions, practiced lots of different things, but I really didn't get any real anchoring in gender itself until I came across my Toltec teacher. So I was working with Castaneda's work. He's the famous Toltec that everybody's heard of, or most have heard of. But his practices were really around the mastery of perception and awareness, which I had great results with. But I came across an African seer who was from a different lineage, and his lineage contained not just perception and awareness, but also gender. And I started to work with this straight away in my late teens and really noticed powerful effects as I'd already experienced with the other Toltec practices. And I started to apply it to my own relationships and things like that. And I discovered on my journey that everything that I had been told about men and masculinity was wrong. And everything that I was told that was bad and shameful and an embarrassment and something that one should not touch within themselves. I'm not just talking about touching yourself, I'm talking about aspects of self that seek to move. And this can even include, so one that would be familiar for everybody would be anger. So anger is an emotion that doesn't get much space in our culture, and it doesn't get much guidance as to how to hone it to be skillful. And I see gender in the same classification, really, where there was no real room for it to become skillful. And we can maybe talk about that as we go along. But what I realized after working with it for so many years was that I needed a space to process some of my own masculine stuff, which we can maybe talk about later. I'm just going to generalize it as that for now. And I knew that culture did not have any spaces that were fit for purpose for what I wanted to do, and what I wanted to do with other men and for myself. And the main reason was I wanted to create spaces for men that could hold the sort of charge that I was talking about. We'll talk about charge in a bit, but to deal with men's backlog, to deal with what is rather than what culture would like it to be, you know, or what the sort of how culture would like men to turn up, rather than you know, having a bit of an airlock between how they are and that kind of expectation. And so I realized I would have to create it myself, and that is exactly what motivated me to consciously do it. Now, I did attend some other men's groups and men's circles, but none of them were holding an edgy enough space for what I wanted to do. They were very feminine in my understanding, which was, we can maybe talk about that later as well. But then I decided, so a few years ago, I started to set up men's spaces and try out ways of trying to get the level of connection and integrity and depth that I was hoping would be possible. And just recently, after a few years of trying, I feel like we've really cracked it. There's me, Thomas, you mentioned, and another chap have been honing our overlapping skills for a few years now. And we feel like we have really got something that is starting to produce a really exquisite quality of depth and connection between the guys. And I can't tell you how rewarding that and warming that is for me, and relieving it is to be in a space where I can really let myself go into. So that's what drew me to it. It was selfish, really, which was I wanted a space that had a better quality for my own processing, and nobody else had made one. So I thought I'll have to go make one myself. That was a long story that was meant to be short that stayed long.
It's interesting how often our own wounding or our own needs drive the things that we end up creating.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, thank you. So you mentioned a little bit about the masculine and feminine, the charge. I've watched a few videos where you talk about the electromagnetic.
Yeah.
I'd love you to speak a bit about that.
So we culturally, so really where I'm coming from with this is a genuine new gender paradigm. And when we use the language of new paradigm under the actual scientific definition, what it means is that, well, usually scientifically they would say that when an existing understanding of something is seemingly mature, but still has anomalies that are not explained, this is usually when the time is ripe for a new paradigm, which is a new perspective on something that was thought to be understood. And that's really where I'm coming at with this way of looking at gender. So at the minute, in our culture, gender is looked at in terms of garments or jobs or roles or face paint. And in my work, you'll often see me speaking in a kilt, and I'll do that on purpose to show that these garments are not gendered. Face paint is not gendered. The difference between war paint and makeup is simply the delicacy of application, perhaps. One uses a small brush, the other one will just daub it on with a couple of fingers across the cheeks. But the idea that we've gendered actual jobs or garments is a real obfuscation of the biological foundations of gender, really. So what we find in modern psychology says that men and women are different because of roles, and roles over years have created entrainment and modification that means that men and women have developed differences as if they began on the same starting field, as if they began as a singular unit that only deviated because of jobs. And in Toltec gender, it's the other way around. They say, no. Men and women are different because of the thing that gave rise to them being men and women, and everything else bubbles from that difference. And in my tradition, we view the thing which governs relating between humans as being the same thing that governs relating between celestial bodies. What governs periodicity, closeness and distance is electromagnetism. And what we find is that in our culture and language, we already have perfect language for understanding gender as electromagnetism. So for example, we'll talk about the spark in a relationship, or we'll talk about attraction or being repulsed by somebody. We'll talk about, women will talk about a man that can take charge, or men will talk about a woman's resistance, or women will talk about a man's capacity. All of these are pure electromagnetic terms. And they have, and I've done some research on this, and these terms came at different times. They were not a singular naming convention. They arose organically over time. And my point is that they've arisen organically because there's a pattern of feeling that we are recognizing and naming without seeing that there's a pattern there. And the work I'm doing is saying there is a pattern here. And not only are we already using perfect language that helps denote the gender position, so we can start to understand something that was seemingly nebulous before, but not only are we already using it, but it's perfectly fit for purpose. And it just makes so much sense when people drop themselves into the model a little bit. So at first it seems like you're learning a sort of like a new model to overlay on the world, but anybody that's worked for it for any period of time realizes that actually it's not that. This is the underpinning. This is the thing that gives rise to the rest. The electromagnetism gives rise to the rest. So in this tradition, men and women both carry the masculine and the feminine in them because we're all electromagnetic. It's just that the electrical is the masculine and the magnetic is the feminine. And so this is why women have to generally, not always, but generally have to deal with being attractive or not. And they have to deal with that psychologically and emotionally and energetically. It's a big challenge for them to deal with the attention and the attraction of men, which is about how they pull them in, whether it's conscious or not, and whether it's willing or not. This is because the nature of the feminine is magnetic, and the nature of the masculine is electrical. So the masculine is all about charge and discharge. And so men actually have a charge cycle that is similar to the menstrual cycle. And here's an interesting thing. So the menstrual cycle is something that, because of maturity and insight and a willingness to talk, everybody knows about it. All boys know about it, yeah? There might be this weird, icky, mysterious thing, but they all know about it. And they all also know that a female's behavior may modify around the time of her menstrual cycle, and she may behave in ways which may otherwise be socially questionable, but we should tolerate that because it's the time of the month and behavior can modify. So we have this tolerance built in for women, but not for men. When men have a charge cycle, and during the peaking of their cycle, their behavior may modify in a way that may otherwise be deemed to be socially questionable. It doesn't mean that they are bad. It doesn't mean that they're shameful. It means that they're on a journey of having to take charge, handle charge, in the same way as women have to deal with the fire of menstruating. And let's face it, I mean, I know many women that are wonderful, civilized, beautiful, radiant beings for 3/4 of the month, but for a week of the month, they struggle to maintain that level of comportment and the level of sort of like decorum and expression they may have the rest of the time. And what I'm saying is that when men start to understand that they have a charge cycle which is similar in nature, it's different, but it's similar, it can really help bring an ease and a compassion around understanding why our behavior changes sometimes, why sometimes we feel really capable and on it and competent, and other times we feel withering and, want to disappear, whereas sometimes we feel like we can be the banks to the ocean of our woman's vastness, and other times we can feel like the little dinghy bobbing on her ocean. And this is to do with our charge cycle. And if men can understand where they are in their charge cycle, they can start to make more effective decisions about when to take certain actions based on their capacity at that time, based on their cycle. So that's one aspect of it. But to get back to this nuance of the masculine and the feminine. So there are qualities to the masculine and the feminine which are in all men and women. But the point is that men tend to have more challenges and tests on the masculine side, and women have more challenges and tests on the feminine side, but all will face both. And so the feminine, this magnetic energy, is all about acceptance and welcome. So it is when we are accepting any situation, we are in the feminine all the time. So the vast majority of the time, we're all in the feminine because we're generally accepting of any given situation. You know, that is the ease, that's the inclusiveness, the collectiveness of the feminine. Now, whenever then we have, so the masculine, so the Toltecs would say that men carry this charge, this spark. They would say it's a burst that allows men to, or the masculine, to face the unknown, to face the void for a short period. And this is so they can face literally the void, the night. Is it teeth or is it resource? Is it warm, succulent fruit or is it claws and potential death? This edginess, this unknown is what the male charge is for. It's the grit, it's the resilience to go in, to not know what's there, but it's short-lived. Once it's spent, it's gone as if it never was. And this is mirrored in male sexuality, and it's mirrored in male aggression cycles. And that is that once that initial burst is gone, men are spent. It's gone. And that is because that's what this charge is for. And what this charge is for is it's actually the charge for change. And it's the energy of non-acceptance. So what you have is the feminine is what we are all in most of the time when we are in welcome and acceptance of what is. It's all about form, state, acceptance, welcome, receptivity. But then something will happen. I'll start to get cold. Somebody will start to annoy me, or I want to do something else. And that's the beginning of non-acceptance. I no longer accept my temperature. I no longer accept this conversation. I no longer accept my location. And then the desire for change comes in. And this is what the masculine is for. It's the charge for change. It's the actual fuel and the resource to bring about the change. So most feelings that we feel them in the feminine, the watery realms of the feminine, which is all about, you know, my experience of the now. But if we want it to be different, that's when most of our feelings are actually all charged for change. So over frustration, anger, sadness, they're all examples of, I wish it was different. I wish you hadn't done that. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish that hadn't happened. I wish they weren't doing that. I wish they would stop doing that. And this is the charge for change. And if we cannot take charge, if we cannot wield the native and natural charge for change that is bubbling within us, then we literally do not have the resource or the fuel to bring about that change. And our culture is set up for the spasmic, which is the unskillful discharge of masculine energy in men and women, so that we do not become skillful with the charge for change. And instead, right from when we're little children, we get told to go away with our feeling and come back when it's gone to talk about the feeling, rather than learning to be skillful with the feeling. And this is why we've got loads of people out there that are really skillful at talking about how they feel and about what change they want in the world and about what they want people to stop doing. And nobody's listening because they're like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but there's no feeling there. You're just talking about stuff, you know? Whereas when people can take charge, which is to speak from the desire for change, then you're dealing with a different situation. Then others are moved by your humanity. They're moved by your presence. They're moved by the power that's moving through, because it's the fuel for it is being used. The resource is being used. So what we're having with men now, with massive mental health fallout, massive kind of depression, huge suicide. I mean, 84 men a week are killing themselves in this country. It's the largest cause of death in men under 50, which is absolutely devastating. And we're all being told that men need to talk about their feelings more. That is not what it is at all. Men need to be welcomed into taking charge in a way that allows them to have a journey to being skillful. So, because the thing is, you know, one more little thread to add on this, then I'll wrap up this section on the masculine and the feminine, where, you know, to become skillful with this charge for change, you know, for any of us, we react like a baby at first to everything. So we were all babies on a mat, pooing and peeing. We had no bladder control, no bowel control. We couldn't control our arms or our legs. And within a few years, we were able to walk and talk and be understood and stuff like that. But we were only able to do that because we watched others walk and talk. And because nobody showed you what you do with a leg muscle or a voice box.
Mm-hmm.
Even now, we don't know how we make our voice box operate. We do it, but nobody knows how.
Yeah.
You know, you can't give me an instruction. How do you do it? I don't know. I just speak. But we went through a process of not knowing and getting it wrong to then getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
And this process of sort of like spasming arm, oh, arm, it's clawing mum. I want to caress mum. It's clawing her. How do I control it? Oh, I keep knocking the milk over. I want to drink the milk. I don't want to knock the cup over.
Mm-hmm.
This journey of consequence and lack of skill that then become a deftness. So this hand that used to claw my mum when I wanted to caress her can now carry hot coffee and do art and all sorts of stuff, but only because I had to go through a process of becoming skillful.
Mm-hmm.
The same process has to happen for our emotions and our mind, because our mind and our emotions spasm and kick unskillfully, just like the physical body did. And at puberty, our emotions and our sensuality and our sexuality are no different to a baby's bowel and bladder just you know, moving freely. But we don't get the support, we don't get the encouragement, and we don't get the good example of how to deftly and skillfully express this charge for change, this desire for it to be different. And instead, all we learn is how to talk about it and then suppress and discharge our real feeling. So what we have in culture now is we have all the drugs and alcohol you might want to suppress charge, to help you forget. And most substances are feminizing in that they help you accept what is. They help you just accept it, you know. So most people will be like, oh, have a drink because then I'm less stressed about all the stuff I'd like to be different. I have a smoke because I can then be at ease and not worry about all the stuff I'd like to be different in my life and in myself. So it's about, we really have to watch. This is why men are encouraged for the pub. They're encouraged to go down to the, you know, and use substances. But then we also have the escape for charge, which is games consoles, the sports stadium. You know, these are outlets for unskillful male charge. I mean, what do we call the atmosphere of the sports stadium and the football stadium? They call it electric.
Yeah.
They say it's electric because men are discharging unskillfully because they don't have the tolerance anywhere else to do it. So they go to the football stadium and go, it's totally unskillful, totally spasmic, but nobody showed them how to wield that in a better way. And then if his team doesn't score, he goes home and beats his wife because he didn't have any other outlet for the charge. But that's just one example. And you know, games consoles are another one where the guys get to feel on edge. Oh yeah, I'm leading my platoon. Yeah, we're doing this mission tonight. We're paratrooping in or whatever. So men get this artificial feeling of edge release and charge satisfaction, but it's totally false. And that's why when they then look at the reality of their life, the reality of their charge and how they feel about themselves, they wither and they go back to the substance, or they go back to the game because it artificially boosts them again. And then when they see the truth, they wither. And so, you know, what stuff I do is all about helping men to honor the journey of taking charge, to claiming the right to not be an expert at first, and to honor the journey of mastery, which is all things take time to become skillful. And we men must give that to each other and to the boys coming up. We must be willing to welcome unskillful boys into the world of men, because if we men don't do it, the women in the culture are certainly not. That is for sure. So yeah, masculine electrical in men and women, magnetic feminine in men and women, and we flow between the two. We flow between acceptance and non-acceptance, you know, from this magnetic ease to this electrical management thing. So obviously there's lots more to it than that, but that's a little meander around the terrain. I hope that made some sense and was of value.
Yeah, definitely. I have a few questions which come out of that.
Great.
First one is, how do we find that charge cycle as a man?
Yeah.
And the other one is, how do we become skillful with that energy? And maybe that's a long one as well, but just wondering that first question, those questions.
Yes. So yeah, tell me the first one again. That
First
was
one is just how do you
yes,
find the charge cycle?
okay, dead easy. It's so easy to find the charge cycle. And that is, when do you want a lot of action? When are the days? Because men have a time when, you know, they could go maybe a few times in a day. That's probably when you're peaking on your charge cycle. And that time when your missus maybe really has to talk you into it, or you haven't thought about sex for a few days, that's when you're ebbing. And you just need to watch that. Now, the thing about the male cycle is, it's actually, so it's recognized. I'm not even making it up. The testosterone cycle is recognized scientifically, and it is recognized as being associated with the sun. And whereas the females are associated with the moon. And this is the source of the morning glory. You know, the morning glory is actually about something that happens on the solar movement. And so the male charge cycle tends to be associated with, there's a daily rhythm and then there's a seasonal rhythm. But you have to watch, just like not all women are in tune with the moon, not all men are in tune with the seasons, but energetically, typically, men would be thriving and at their best from spring through to the end of summer. And then they would be less productive and less oomphy over the winter period, which would be very much tying in with the natural charge cycles of the availability of electrical energy, you know. And this is why we have spring randiness in all species, including human, you know, and it's because of there are seasonal associations there that do affect our hormonal drives. So the thing to watch out for men is watch for the morning glory. The other one is to watch for your seasonal rhythms and to notice where you're at. And it takes a few years to monitor it, to really get a sense of, Darren, wow, I really noticed for a few days there, goodness me, all I had to do was like glance at her and I was thinking about it, you know, and then, shit, to talk me into it there, I realized it'd gone almost a week without thinking about sex. What happened there? You know, and this is when you can monitor it. I think the other thing for men these days is that they have to be compassionate to the fact that we do have lower testosterone levels generally than men of the past. There are many reasons for this, and this is where we have to temper our idea of what it is to be man. So, you know, earlier I mentioned anger as an emotion, and so anger is really interesting because it shows up very early in all of us, and almost everybody I know gets told to put it away at the same age. And so it means that we learn to suppress that particular emotion really early on. And obviously, anyone that's done any meaningful work on themselves know that you cannot make any emotion go away. So it means that it is simply stored there. And what you find is you skip forward to adulthood and you find out that everybody's got a different way of expressing anger. And some will go, blah, 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 blah. And others will go, and some others will like not invite you out for a few weeks or make you a crap cup of tea or put less food on your plate, you know, and drip feed their anger over weeks because they can't honestly say to you, hey, I'm really angry because of this. So instead they let you know with these little venom moves. Now, here's the thing. The anger is the same. That's the shared humanity. The behavior that charge became as it bubbled through the form, that's what's different. Masculinity is no different, and charge is no different. The charge is always pure and honest. Always pure and honest. It's the behavior that can be questionable. And what we have done in our culture with masculinity is we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. We've thrown the source energy out with the behavior, not realizing, no. All we do is we just change the behavior. There's nothing wrong with this energy. And so when we're looking for our charge cycle, I can't tell you to look for a behavior, but I can tell you to look for the desire for change. And I can tell you to look for your own sexual cycle, you know, and to say, well, where are you spilling your charge? Because you have it. There's a wild man in you somewhere. And where is it being spilled? And if it feels like it's been so long since you saw it, then where are you suppressing it? Is it in the TV? Is it in the drink? Is it in the smoke? Is it in the gym? Have you just shut down? Are you depressed? Which is a result of compounded non-expression. It's depression as a result of compounded suppression of feeling. And I know that because of my own journey with it and gradually coming out of it through realizing it is compounded baggage that just must be shed one bit of charge at a time, you know? And so when looking for charge, look for the desire for change. Look for where you are venting passionately but indirectly from what it's really about, then you'll find it. And you'll find it's huddled in little corners of your life, you know, and we have to shamelessly and with compassion pull it out of those hidden corners and start to bring it unskillfully at first, but then more skillfully into our lives.
Thank you, Darren. So what comes to me is, as you're speaking, this desire for change, are you seeing that manifesting in the world at the moment? That suddenly everyone's going,
Yeah.
right, we want change.
Yeah, there's loads of charge around, but the challenge is still about having it enter the body in a way which matches our good intent. This is what I call self-mastery. Self-mastery is really about when the effective expression matches our innermost desire, and I think often it can get distorted by our frustration levels, you know, or by our anger and outrage, and you know that can affect our efficacy and our ability to connect with others. So I do see there's loads of charge for change in the world, and some of it is starting to be skillfully wielded. But if we were looking at the reality against what is needed and against, you know, the resource that is available, so there's available charge and the ability for it to enter the world. The gap is like about the size of the Hoover Dam. You know, it's like there is still a massive backlog of dormant feeling being held and carried by people that they simply do not know how to healthily and effectively and skillfully let it move through them, that will bring them release and peace, but also have the effect they wish it to have, bring the change they want it to bring, because charge released unskillfully tends to bring destruction and disconnection, whereas charge wielded skillfully always brings connection and growth. That's the gap we're at, I think. You know, it can be really, it's so easy to do damage with charge unskillfully wielded, you know, as anybody who's lost their temper can attest. You know, you may didn't mean to do it, but you end up with this massive fallout of disconnection and pain that can happen from unskillful charge. So I approach this with, you know, I feel great enthusiasm and optimism for the charge I see in the world, but I also feel great, like a pregnant compassion for the space I feel we need to give each other for some unskillful movement, because there is simply so much backlogged charge out there in men and women alike.
So I guess, thank you. Like, there's lots of different avenues we could go down here. I guess what comes to me is, how do we move forward almost? I know I'm going off question slightly, but you know, at the moment we've got current situation, people are going off using that charge, but not in a skillful way. What do you think's needed really in order for us to transmute this?
Yes. What I mean, I'll be honest with you. What is needed is for people to. So we have. You know, we have these various archetypal phrases that we use in this gender work for understanding masculine and feminine. So charge is one, obviously that's masculine, but state and form is all feminine. You know, so when we're talking about taking charge of our state, this is about the ourselves. You know, it's about saying, can I handle my own feeling and get it, you know, moving in a way, not for the big stuff in the world, little stuff, as in my own life and relationships, my own self-care, my own attention to my own well-being. And if people are so frantic and desperate about the state of the world that they are rushing away from their own care of their state to try and save a perceived external state, that is firefighting, and is just going to cause burnout and dissatisfaction. I feel. I think the thing that needs to be, this is a time to dig deep and dig in on one's own state, and to realize that if you can't take care of your own state, then actually you're maybe not as well equipped to help change the state out there as you think, because if you can't convert your own inner state to one of well-being, how can you effectively evoke other human beings to change what they're doing and to hear you and to see your vision rather than hear you as some angry blamer, or somebody who's lost their temper. And I use the term temper to apply to all feeling in which we lose the skillful expression of. So we normally only talk about temper with anger, but to me, temper applies to all feelings. So if you're so sad that you can't get out of bed in the morning, then you've lost your temper with your sadness, you know? If your frustration and overwhelm is so much that you literally, you know, have to have a drink first thing in the morning, which many people are in that situation, then you've lost your temper with that feeling, you know. So it applies to all sort of feelings where we've lost the ability to channel it and make it effective, and instead, you know, we're kind of floored by its impact. I felt like I went down a little bit of a tangent there. Please do help me bring it back to the thread.
So you're talking about temper.
Yes. Yes, and just about the, yes, so, and bringing temper to one's state and one's relationships is, I think, where the real attention should be. Because, so, I mean, I often say this in my sessions with people, like people who meditate or engage in personal practices, and I'll say to them, you know, were you able to tap into a state of well-being and inner peace within yourself in your practices? And many of them say, yeah, I do that every morning in my meditation. I'll be like, okay, great. And then, do you go shopping? Do you go down the street? You know, what happens to that state? Are you able to keep it? Are you able to maintain that state while you're in the supermarket or whatever? And they'll be like, you know, I manage a few hours and then I might be buffeted out of it. And it's like, well, that means you can't take charge of your state yet. It means you actually haven't established a stable state that where you can really meet others from. You're still in a reactive modality that you're not fully aware of. Now, that's okay. It's all right to be there. Most of us spend a lot of time there realizing how reactive we are to the currents of the world. But it's just about that, you know, I really understand and empathize with people's gasping yearning for the world to be different and wanting to rush to petition and appeal to perceived power and authority while not looking at the car crash of their own world, you know, like their own personal state, their own private state. And it's like, don't worry about the world out there, you know, worry about the world in here. And if you work on this, that will change. And I know that, you know, it sounds twee, it sounds a bit spiritual, paradoxical, but I'll tell you what, I've seen this work too often where you know, we hear this cliche of be the change you want to see in the world. But I have seen the evidence of that, where when people change their internal state, their perception of the external state changes. And not only that, the actual life experience they have, the people they meet, the engagements with the state they have become more human and humane and become more of the quality they were seeking. I mean, make of that what you will, but I find that the same works in the other direction. The people that have gone looking to find bully boys and fascists have gone and found them. You know, you know, you do seem to get what you were looking for. And I've seen this evidence too much over the last 20 years to dismiss it. So I think the attention right now, first and foremost, is personal state. If you have a good state of care there, then one can move into the world. But then, because you're then coming from a place of not us and them or adversarialness, you're coming from that real heartfelt compassion for the difference, you know, and you can convert that anger and that rage into something benevolent and loving rather than something that might damage you or the others that might be on the receiving end.
Beautiful, very wise. I really love that. What you're saying about state. Yeah, it kind of reminds me a bit, you know, it's like almost we want to build a castle, but our foundations are completely rotten.
Exactly. And in a way, if you can't trust yourself to hold true to your own values and standards for an entire day, you know, then how can we ask that of others and then demand it of them and then petulantly rage at them for not rigorously maintaining those values and standards when we look at our own lives? It's like, well, I'm not even doing that myself. And I'm just talking about the biscuit consumption and the chocolate consumption, not even about anything big, you know. You know. And then if we get into that, if we can drop into that humanity, drop into that sort of the real imperfection, we can soften our approach with people that we would otherwise feel very hard and strong about. And if we can come from that shared humanity of, do you know what, to be a skillful human is difficult, you know, and we're complex and things are complex and I don't have all the answers. So, you know, let's move from there, shall we? And I find coming from that place, it just gives a much more human encounter on the other end. And that happens with agents of state, with their representatives and stuff like that. And surely coming from a beginning human connection rather than an adversarial, demanding, hierarchical one is surely the direction we would like to be going in, I would think.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the other questions here. I feel we spoke a little bit about, men's relationships to their balls. I feel when you're talking about masculine, feminine. I guess one of the things as you're speaking, I'd like you to talk about is about fear, really, because I feel in my own life, I had similar upbringing to you on one level. My father was military. I went to boarding school.
Wow.
And kind of, it was quite a traumatic time. And I think I realized that I have had a lot of fear of what others would think. And I see that as men, I see this very commonly, that we're just kind of almost paralyzed. I can't do that. I can't say that. And it's like we've lost that authenticity to be myself, to be, fuck it.
Yes.
Yeah, I made a mistake. Let's try this out. I'm going to paint. I'm going to do this. It's like, oh, no, you can't do that. So I'd love you to speak a bit about that, about fear, maybe how you faced fear in your life.
Yes. Let's talk about that. That's a great one. Thank you for raising it. So I think men are facing excessive fear at the minute because we are dealing with a situation that the entire culture seems to have got on board with, it being righteous and justified that men can be judged for the deeds of others. And in fact, more than that, they can be judged for the deeds of others long dead and distant, and that seemed to be okay. And so there's almost a quality of socialized original sin on men at the minute that is affecting the fear of their expression, because as I mentioned earlier, every boy knows that if he moves like from the masculine, i.e. with an interest in a female, or with a bit of bullshit confidence or whatever these days, or a bit of bravado, every boy knows that it better be good or you are going to get a backlash. And that fear that's instilled, because through feminism, women and feminist men have taken a mandate that seems to feel that they feel justified to be as vicious as they like to men, and it seems to be justified. So you can have boys that are having horribly vicious encounters with women and girls, which is what is seeding this fear, which is why men are fearful to move. Now, in Toltequity, in the Toltec tradition, Toltequity, we have these things called the natural enemies, and the natural enemies are exactly that. It's basically, it doesn't matter what you believe, it doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter what you think, you're going to face these. They are the natural enemies, and the first one is fear, and it's because it has a function, and the function is survival and protection. But it also arises when we are going to expand our boundaries, when we're going to leap off the edge. So in terms of tempering fear, we have to learn to read the difference between survival and hesitation and sort of inhibition. And once we develop a sense of that, then we can start to step forward with fear, or to listen to it. But there's no escaping it. You can't escape fear. But here's the interesting thing. Most people think that they're afraid of the other. They're afraid of the gang. They're afraid of what she'll say. They're afraid of the rejection. They're afraid of the shaming. And what I've discovered is that none of that is true. We are not afraid of other. We are afraid of how we will handle the feeling that will rise in us. We're afraid of our own reaction to our own feeling. We're afraid of whether we can cope. We're afraid of whether we're going to lose it. We're afraid of whether we're going to get eaten, or whether we're going to eat his face, or whether we're going to go mad and make a fool of ourselves. But what we're afraid of is self, not other. We're afraid of whether we can take charge. We're afraid of whether it's going to look good. All sorts of things, but it's actually all about us. It's not about the other. It's about, can I handle this? And what I've found with men's work is that when we allow men to meet themselves in more of their own spectrum, in their fear, in their rage, in their physicality, in their embodiment, you know, when they can just find themselves in that and realize that they can find themselves there, they can find peace and all rightness there, and that it's not a big panic thing. You know, the difference in a man's life is astronomical at that point. It's a bit like the difference between when we, you know, it's a bit like if there's a cold bath or getting into cold water, you know, the masculine's a bit like that. The first reaction is, ooh, you know, that shock reaction of it. And it's about saying all feelings are like that first. Let's ease into that and then find your all rightness in it. And this brings us nicely onto balls, actually, because the main difference between men and women in Toltequity, the primary difference energetically arises from the position of the balls. So this is where, so all mammal fetuses are female first in the womb. Obviously, they will become male, and that was already determined by chromosomes, but for a period, they're all female. And then something happens, this introduction of testosterone pushes what would have been ovaries and like fallopian tubes and all that, and a vagina, into becoming testes and a penis. And so what we end up with is we have these two permutations of the human being, one with the balls on the inside of the body cavity and one with the balls on the outside. Now, in the Toltec tradition, all organs are perceiving instruments. They're all involved in our perceptual processing of the world. And this is why, and most mums I know are aware of this, it's really funny, but the men aren't aware of it. And I've seen so many mums comment on, they've noticed that how much more sensitive than girls the boys are, and how sensitive they are to shaming, how sensitive they are to getting into trouble. And the women are baffled because they're like, I thought the boys would be tougher. And also they're baffled because that didn't bother me that much. And it's so funny, and it's because the men carry. So it's really funny that men have this impression of being the strong ones, but if everybody knows that if you want to floor a man, you know where to kick him. And it's like, doesn't matter how big his muscles are, doesn't matter how big his pecs are or his thighs, you hit him in the nads and he's going to struggle. And this sensitivity is reflective of their perceptual power. And the balls on the outside of the body cavity are what give men their objectivity. It's what make men more visually orientated, more sort of like disconnected from what's going on inside of them, because women have all of that immense sensitivity of the balls tucked in their body cavity. So all of the data men get, I mean, men will know this, any women listening won't, but if you take your clothes off in the cold or something, the sensitivity of the ball hairs to react to temperature and stuff is just incredible. They're super sensitive to any shift. That's just unbelievable. This is what gives men their vigilance in the world, their ability to react with lightning speed to the smallest shift, to have such spatial dexterity and awareness, which is recognized by science as being superior in men than to women. And this is because of this clarity of perception from the balls on the outside. But it does make us hypersensitive to a whole host of things that women would be like, come on, suck it up, what are you on about? What are you on about? What are you bothered about that for? And it's because for those particular things, they don't realize where they're buffered by the literal substance of the body around those balls, buffering them from some of the exposure in the world. Now, where they do have their sensitivity is in how things feel within the human form. So men can do stuff and be like, I'll give you an example. So one example is, I like coffee first thing in the morning, but my missus, she's like, oh my goodness, how can you do that? That'd strip my stomach apart. I need to eat something first. And I'd be like, I just don't feel that, and she's just so much more aware of the minutiae of what's going on within our body cavity than I am, and I'm just like, yeah, I can just suck up, eat this, do that. And she's like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, because she's just so much more aware of what's going on within the body. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, men can be aware of what's going on in their body, women can be aware of what's going on outside, but we're talking about what the Toltecs would call the predilection, the leaning, the one that is 60-40, rather than 50-50. It's much more like 60-40, and even 70-30 for your sex, basically. So this ball's energy is really what gives rise also to this fear that men are experiencing, because they're just so much more aware of the consequence of the slightest action going wrong, the slightest thing. We actually have a hypervigilance and a hypersensitivity to certain things that women simply don't have. Now, women have a hypersensitivity to deeds which may affect how somebody feels, you know? So they'll be like super deft around that stuff, whereas men will be in there with the gallows humor and the elbow in the ribs and all that sort of stuff, much less bothered about how it feels and more bothered about getting on with it, you know? And it's so interesting. There's these wonderful complements of where balls on the inside and balls on the outside really help the human team be a great one, you know? So sometimes we can have, so the female being subjective, the male being objective. So men might be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. How does that feel on the inside, you know? And women might be thinking about, well, I really feel this, but I'm not sure if it's real or true. How does this look from the outside, you know? And there's a real complementariness that is in the human team. But so much of it born just purely from the sensitivity of the balls, and then how that then informs the rest of our psychology and our processing, purely just from the data we receive, where the women primarily getting it from within, and the men from outside. Now, there is an exception here, and this is to do with something you mentioned earlier on, which was about men being in the feminine more. And I just want to touch on that for a moment, because the Toltecs say that men hide in the feminine and women hide in the masculine. And it is because they feel so vulnerable in their own sex. Men, to act in the man, to really be on the edge and to show himself, feel so vulnerable and so exposing, it's easier to hide in the feminine. And for women, it's the same. So we have an archetype to understand that in Toltequity, and we call the feminine in men, we call the boy, and the masculine in men and women, we call the mother. And there's a reason for this, and the reason is when, as I mentioned, all mammal fetuses are female first, and it's because when men are boys, they can't take charge, they can't face the unknown, they can't patrol the boundary, they can't do these things. The mother does these things for him. She patrols the boundaries, she brings in the new resource, she draws the line and takes charge when appropriate to defend him. And so these are the fallback positions. So that's why you'll find in a relationship, even if a woman doesn't have children, if a man is in the boy, in the feminine, she'll mother him. And she can't help it. It's not behavioral, it's not psychological, it's pure gender. And the same for him. If he is not in the masculine, he'll feel like a boy around her. And it's not to do with his behavior, it's to do with the gender permutation. You can be a man that plays a game, like plays a games console or drinks, and still give off the masculine energy, and women respond to it like a masculine energy. It's not about the behavior, it's about what you're sitting in. And so for men, the challenge is, how do I get out of the boy? How do I do that so that then the women around me will flip out of the mother? You know, that's what we've got to do, is we have to move into the man, and then she will flip out the mother back into the woman. You know, her gender will flip when we flip ours, basically.
Okay. So we've got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
I'm really interested. That's that kind of journey then from the boy to the man. What do you use when you're working with men?
Yeah, so I use exactly this. So we don't have time to go into the whole model of it, as in what we use for it. I mean, it is published online, though. People can go and look up any of my sort of stuff on the basic shapes or the return to indigenous mind. Any of that will give the framework. But the way I approach it with men, and the way it needs to be approached, and it's not just for men, it's for women as well now, because we live in a much more androgynous culture. So the kind of the rite of passage to adulthood, out of the entitled child and the cushioned child, is when we consciously say, so we all began in the feminine, which means we had to receive the penetrations of the world. We had to accept what was. So the moment of initiation and transformation happens when we say, thank you, world. I have accepted your penetrations. I have received your points. And I have processed my feeling. Here is my change. Here is my charge. Here is what I will no longer accept. And bit by bit, deed by deed, by acting on by our own measures and our own values, what we will no longer accept in our own lives builds the man out of the boy, one step at a time. We clear our state of the things that we accidentally let in our ignorance and in our innocence, and we purge them one by one, like a cell membrane that is, so the masculine is like a cell membrane. In fact, the cell membrane is masculine. It's a semi-permeable, selective electrical barrier. And that's what we need to bring to bear in our lives, is to let in that which we value and trust, and to, you know, become hard to protect that which we would seek to keep safe, but to also ruthlessly, willfully, and with the grit and agony that it requires, say no and expunge those things which do not meet with their values and standards. And bit by bit, and it's an agonizing process. It is a Herculean task. It is the hero's journey to make those steps one by one, beginning with the stuff you already know that needs acted on. Not the big fancy world-saving stuff, not the petition to your MP, not the writing to Donald Trump and talking about him on Facebook, but the quiet little things that you know you should be saying no to. The quiet little thing that you would rather not be doing, that you still find yourself engaged in. Right there, that's where the turning point happens.
Beautiful, beautiful. As you've been speaking, what's been coming to mind is brotherhood. Do you find that as men, you know, I've kind of been doing a lot of interviews and research into the lover archetype, and Rod Boothroyd in the first podcast mentioned about the lover is connection.
Yeah.
And I see that with this lockdown, we've kind of lost that connection almost. What's your sense with doing this type of work, going from the boy to the man, doing these inner reflections and right boundaries, but having support or having brotherhood or sisterhood?
Well, I'll tell you what, this is something that has been a passion of mine for the last few years. And I have been in a bittersweet agony over my desire and my dream against the reality. Because what I've discovered, so a little story, I tell everything in a story. So I went to a Rebel Wisdom talk a few years ago, and this was when they just got started. And there was a military guy, American military guy on. He was talking about, he was a morality teacher at the counterterrorism unit in Cambridge University. So work out what that means. The morality unit of counterterrorism. Wow. I can't imagine what thoughts he has to feel. But he gave this great talk about, his talk was more about society abandoning veterans and about the homelessness and alcoholism and drug abuse rate of veterans.
Mm.
And I pulled him aside afterwards because he was talking about societal abandonment. And I was trying to say to him that, no, to me, because what happens is brotherhood is formed when men go over the edge together, whatever the edge is. So that can be digging a hole, it can be going to war, it can be any kind of shared endeavor, but it's about men facing the unknown together. And the more they do that, the deeper their connection can be. But modern men don't get that opportunity because, in a way, there is no edge left in our safe cities. You know, the rough edges were all taken away, which is why there's been such a turn on masculinity, because even the younger men are going, what do we need this edginess for? What do we need this? The borders are all safe, or, you know, there's no need to face the teeth in the night. There aren't any teeth in the night, you know, and it's like, no. You're just so far from the edge, lad. You don't know what's in the night. You don't know what it looks like to stare over the parapet. You've been so coddled in the gifts of your ancestors and your mothers and fathers that you've never seen the edge yet. So there's this real sort of war on it. I lost my thread there with that little deviation. Where was I? Help me out.
Brotherhood.
Thank you, brotherhood. So what I found was that, so I was saying to this guy that I noticed that what happened is that these military guys were forging brotherhood. They were experiencing brotherhood, and then They were feeling what it was like to have that brotherhood removed. And this is what was causing their dropout. This is what was causing the cataclysmic crash of these capable men, these strong, trained, incisive, effective men, brought to a puddle on the ground, a broken heap on the street, literally. What can turn this hero into a puddle of brokenness? And as well, this is what happens when brotherhood is removed. And my point to this man was, what we are seeing in culture with depression and substance abuse and escapism into games and pornography is what happens when men have never tasted that brotherhood in the first place. It's what happens to the man that never had it in the first place. And the only places we see the indomitable spirit of man as it should be, the radiant spirit of self-belief and power, the only places we see it are in boyhood gangs and in the military. And it's because they've got that brotherhood. And what I have seen in the very few instances where I feel in our work we've achieved it with some groups, what I have seen is men who would otherwise be quite low in the natural pecking order, and they know it. Just in terms of their looks, their attractability, their sort of self-power, they kind of know where they are. Men do know where they are in the pecking order, same as women. They all know where they are in the pecking order in a group. And so these men that would never normally put themselves forward, they know where they are in the pecking order. I've seen these men go from where they would be in culture, where their heads hung low, they're walking around not feeling much about themselves, self-worth and self-esteem quite low. Once they've tasted that brotherhood, my goodness, they might as well be Thor, you know. The indomitable spirit of man, the goodwill, the unbreakable spirit of man that will cause even a 5-foot midget to throw himself into the front line of the enemy with a grin on his face, that comes only from brotherhood. It's only that connection. And I call this the clitoris wound in men, because it's so sensitive and it touches so many, it's so tiny, most men don't even know it exists, but it touches so many nerves like the clitoris does. I think the great void that many men are seeking to fill is in fact the void of brotherhood, and they don't know the bridge back. They don't know how to get it, because too many men are caught up in jostling and one-upmanship and social competition when they come together, that they don't know how to safely reconnect with that. So brotherhood is a great quest, yearning of mine, and something that I deeply hunger to champion. But it's such a difficult thing to define, because it's in the subjective. It's not an objective thing. You can't say this will give it. It's something that's arrived at. You know, I think the word brother is often bandied around too casually between men who would hope for such. You know, and it's like I yearn to call you brother, but when I say the words, it's not filled with the warmth of the connection that I would like it to have. And what I mean is, with the events we've been doing, we've started to get that. These men are able to look, really feel it and know it, and warmly be able to trust each other without constantly having to glance over and make sure he's still there, sort of thing, you know. So yeah, brotherhood is a deep aspiration, yearning, and hunger of mine, and it's something that I feel needs all men to champion. If only they knew what fruits could lie on the other side.
Thank you. Made me reflect. I was watching King Arthur, the latest one with Guy Ritchie, film last night, and there's a scene where they're going from the harbour, you know, King Arthur and a few others. There's a band of about 8 men, and I was like, brotherhood. Yeah, you can see that energy, and it's like, yeah, I see that yearning in all men, that yeah, we want to be together, we want to work together, and we just generally don't have that. So we're kind of coming to the end of the hour, so I'd love you to just segue into what is the work that you do with men, and how can they get in touch. And
Thank you. Yeah, so I do one-to-ones and events away. We do these forays over the edge with Thomas Shorcon, who you've already had on. These little we don't tell you what you're doing, because it's not the unknown if you know what you're doing beforehand. It's about facing the unknown and finding the resource within yourself that you didn't know you had. It's not about an ordeal. It's about meeting oneself and meeting other men. in mysterious spaces and to discover new aspects of in the ways in which men can connect. So yeah, we do these furries over the edge. So yes, retreats is one option, but I mean these days because of lockdown, a lot of it's one-to-one I do, which is either like this or on the phone or something like that. So a lot of the work is doing that, and I'm just working on getting my online courses ready. I have a social network ready to go and an online platform for actually going more in depth into all of this in great detail, the electromagnetic side and also the Toltec side as well, and specifically for men, the sort of self-initiation, rite of passage stuff. So that'll be coming very soon. I'll be launching within the next sort of month or so. So if people want to get in touch, the best place right now is darrendeojee.com. And it's really just my mentoring site right now. So there's not a lot of info and all this stuff on there, but it's certainly where you can connect with me, get in touch, see testimonials of people from both the one-to-one work I've done, men and women, as well as the retreats. And it's certainly, there's a mailing list sign up there where you can certainly find out when the social network will be launched as well, which I'm very excited about, and when the next events will be coming up, because they will be happening. There will be another one before the year end, we're sure of it, even if it's low numbers and even if we're a metre and a half apart and having to walk up to the fire, taking it in turns, we'll find a way.
Great, great.
And obviously people can look on YouTube. There's loads of videos on YouTube. If you just look up my name, or my channel is Alternative Answers. But the name, looking at my name is the best bet on YouTube, because so many other people have filmed talks of mine that I don't have on my own channel. And you can certainly find them just by putting that in there.
Okay, thank you. I'll put a link to your website in the description, and I will put kind of other bits and pieces of information about you in there as well.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that.
So yeah, it's been a real pleasure connecting to you. I've really felt your heart, brother. So thank you.
Thank you.
I say brother, but yeah, I feel that in my heart.
Yeah, but
so.
I heard it. I felt the substance in it. I could feel it. It was a different brother than the one we began with, and I could feel it. So we have connected. I feel that. Yeah, and I'd be happy to, you know, obviously we just skirted around the beginning here. If you ever wanted to go more in depth or talk about other aspects, I'd be happy to come and do that with you.
Yeah, thank you. So people watching this, please, if there's an aspect that Darren's spoken about, you think, oh yeah, I'd like him to speak more about it, please comment below, and then I will speak to Darren about getting him on again. But yeah, it's been a real pleasure. And
likewise.
yeah, you know, if there's any way I can support your work, then please let me know.
Well, you are. This is it. Thanks for having me on. It's a great pleasure.
Okay. Take care, man. Bye-bye.